Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, both those in the chamber and those listening online. Welcome. Welcome to the Cabinet this afternoon. We have more guests than usual, and thank you very much for exercising your democratic right and joining us. There are a few ground rules that we observe during Cabinet. I would ask you to listen quietly to the discussions that are going on. Cabinet is not Council, even though we are currently in the Council chamber. So it is less of a debate, it is question and answers that will be going on over each of the items that we'll be considering today. So thank you very much. Nick, do we have any apologies for absence? Paul Griffiths.
We've apologies from County Councillor Paul Griffiths, and County Councillor Simon Howarth is standing in for County Councillor Francis Taylor for the Independent Party.
Thank you, Nick, and welcome, Councillor Howarth. We have the feedback to Cabinet from the Performance and Overview Scrutiny Committee on two meetings, one held on the 3rd of June and one held on the 10th of June. I will refer you to those documents, Cabinet, and thank once again Councillor Neil for taking the opportunity to share the deliberations of both those committees, and I can assure him that they will be taken into account as the decision-making process continues. We now come on to item 5, report of the Place Scrutiny Committee, the call-in relating to the letting of the former Abergavenny Library. Before we begin, and this is for members of the public, the call-in has asked us to review the decision that was made. It does not have the authority to ask us to overturn the decision that was made, and we will be discussing the review as per the document here. I will now bring in Councillor Callard. Welcome, Councillor Callard.
Thank you, Leader, and good afternoon, everybody, and everybody watching online and in the chamber. Cabinet will be aware that last Wednesday there was a special meeting of the Place Scrutiny Committee where the decision to award the tender to Monmouthshire Muslim Community Association toward the leasing of the old library was discussed. It was a very productive meeting, I think, and I'd like to thank the committee and the chair of the committee and the way it was conducted. We had a long debate. We were there for nearly 3.5 hours, and I think we covered off a lot of the topics, which I think was very helpful, both for myself in the discussion and I think for members of the public that were watching. The committee, following that meeting, voted to refer the decision back to Cabinet, and I would make the point that it was a tied vote, with half of the committee accepting the Cabinet's previous decision, and another half wanting to refer it back to Cabinet for another decision, and it was the chair's casting vote, which is the reason that we're discussing it here today. The reasons it was sent back to Cabinet are in the report, and I'll briefly go through them one by one, I think, and it'll give me a chance to respond to them. Many of these reasons I think we probably covered in the debate itself, actually, last Wednesday, and I think in doing this, I'll probably be again covering ground that I covered then, but I think it would be good to be clear on these topics. So I've got 7 reasons here which the Scrutiny Committee asked us to reconsider. They all hang around the idea that this should be retendered, and there are a number of reasons for that underneath. So I'll take them one by one. The first one is that an independent valuation of rental income should be carried out. when we talked about this in scrutiny committee with myself and Nick Keys, acting head of landlord services, we made the point that we don't, in essence, put a target price on anything that we lease when we act as a landlord. And we do that for a number of reasons, but primarily we don't want to, I guess, prejudge what people might see the value of something in. In a way, it may depress the price. We conduct an open tender process, and following submissions against that tender, we then judge the performance of the various tenders in the scoring matrix, which was made public at the time when the decision was made public. The second point is regarding the time frame of the tender, and again, this was a topic that we did discuss at the committee last week. I think the time frame for the tender was just shy of a month. That's been a very normal time frame for tendering processes that have been carried out by the council in the past. I can see merit in an argument that it could potentially be longer. I think that's something that we can go away and reflect on. But in this case, I am satisfied that it was long enough, purely by evidence that we received multiple applications to the tender. I think I would be much more concerned about the length of the time that the tender was out there if we'd only received one or two tenders, but that wasn't the case. We received a number, and they were competitive with one another. So I'm confident that in this case, the tender timeframe was significant. Although, as I said, I'm happy to reflect on that and look in future if it's something that we should look at again. The next 2 points I think are linked. They are a building survey and maintenance compliance. So they ask for an independent building survey should be undertaken to ascertain the condition of the building. And the second point is ensuring the building is maintained to comply with its importance, allowing potential bidders to have full possession of the facts so they can bid accordingly. So that's not maintenance compliance after a lease has been awarded, that's maintenance compliance during the tender process. I would say on this that the council has resources itself in order to conduct building surveys and maintenance compliance checks. We don't need to go out to external consultants, to spend more money with external consultants in order to try and get this information. We have the capability in-house. And I would also add that during the tender process, a potential tenderer is well within their rights to ask if they can themselves ask a surveyor to come and conduct a building survey in order that they can get this information themselves. It's not necessarily the responsibility of the council to provide it, much like when you're buying a house, you don't ask the person who's selling the house to provide the survey, you commission your own survey, so you have the facts at hand about the condition of the building. The next point is regarding community consultation, and this is something I feel very strongly about, and I think we had a really good discussion during the scrutiny committee about community consultation. I'm really in favour of community consultation, and I think one of the things that we talked about during the scrutiny committee, which was a really good debate, is how that can work during a competitive tendering process. And it was interesting. I suppose, as cabinet member with this in my portfolio, I'm trying to find a route whereby it can work operationally. I think there may well be one, and it's something I'm continuing to reflect on. And it may be actually that before a building is tendered, we can look at, talking things more roundly with the community. I would say that off the back of the committee last week, I know a number of members of MMTA, along with a number of councillors, both county councillors and town councillors, went around Grovefield Ward and spoke to many residents about it, and actually were able to provide a lot of reassurance to those residents who were concerned, and also received a lot of really positive feedback about this proposal, which I think is sometimes missed. The The next point is about the historic importance of the building. I think this is, I guess, potentially a little bit more nuanced. It's, it's a building I love. I went to the library, there when I was young, and I do recognise its importance, which is why we're keen to see it, not continue to be empty and further degrade. But the building is listed, and it carries with it protection with that listing, and I would fully expect any tenant of any council building, no matter who they are, to treat the building with the respect it deserves, especially so if it has that additional protection of listing. And it will be something that we monitor, as we will with any leases, to make sure that the lease is being adhered to, the terms of that lease. And the final point, it might be worth adding that these points were brought by the Conservative council, in essence, was to sell the building. When we were early on in this process, we did talk about whether we should sell or lease the building, but I believe important buildings like this, important local buildings, should remain the property of the public. It's a public building and it should remain in the ownership of the public. Once you sell a building, you lose all of these controls, which you might otherwise have in terms of how the building is looked after, things which with a lease you have some influence over. So I disregarded the idea of selling the building because I don't think this is a suitable building to dispose of. I think it should remain within council ownership. So those are the points which were brought up in the scrutiny committee. I've reflected on them as I have here at Cabinet, but at the moment I am not minded to change the original decision. I think the original decision was the correct one, and I believe that MMCA will be a good tenant for this property. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Callard. I would now invite members of the Cabinet. Do you have any questions or observations?
No, so does me.
Councillor Birch.
Thank you, Leader. I think, Councillor Callard, you touched on the fact that this is a historic building, a real important part of the heritage of Abergavenny. I take it that the ability of MMCA, the capacity to care for such an important building, and also the conditions of the lease that require permission for any changes have all been looked at and covered, and that we're confident that the building will remain safe and in good order for the future?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Birch. Yeah, I mean, the lease will be drawn up after this decision is taken, if indeed, Cabinet agrees with my recommendation that we should uphold our original decision, and the terms of that lease will provide mechanisms by which we can look after our interest in that asset.
Do you want to follow that up, Councillor Birch?
Thank you, Leader. No, that's fine.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions?
Thank you. Thank you. So one of the issues that has been highlighted during the call-in and in much of the discussion that I've had with residents is the question of parking in the streets near the old library building. It's a problem that does have the potential to become even more challenging, excuse me, when the library is occupied, but that would be the case whatever the building is used for. I don't think that people do want to see the building left empty, and I also think that it's a very small number of people who have any sort of ideological opposition to a mosque, but their worries around car parking are understandable. And I know that my predecessor, Councillor Sheila Woodhouse, who was a member of the previous administration, she put considerable effort into finding a solution to parking pressures in that area, but she wasn't able to. And similarly, I have also found this a very complicated issue to tackle. So can you tell me whether you're satisfied that parking pressures would be adequately addressed following a lease agreement? And do you think that there's scope for us to revisit the council's approach to parking around there in light of any new use for the building? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Wright. And I agree with you completely that, you know, one of the main concerns that I've heard from residents is about the parking pressures in the area. Prior to the scrutiny meeting last week, I was contacted by a member of MMCA to talk about, they contacted me to explain that they were aware of many of these concerns, and actually their desire is to be a good neighbour, you know, and to support the neighbourhood. And I know they are particularly cognizant of the parking pressures in the area, and so within that, they have made a commitment that they will use public parking spaces. You know, we've got Byfield Lane car park, we've got Fairfield car park, and we've got the little car park just off Baker Street as well, you know, in order that they don't add to the pressures already experienced on Victoria Street. I would also, I guess, echo your comments that I think whatever the building was used for, it would have created additional parking pressure in the area. And actually, I think that with the building being used for a group such as this, they are, I would say, quite a cohesive group. So in contrast that to, for example, if it were to be an art gallery or a shop or a commercial premises where you would have customers coming and going, I think because the people who will be using it will be members of that community and actually very alert to their responsibilities to the surrounding community in terms of good neighbourly relations. I think actually this proposal and this tender is particularly strong in that area, in that people will make a real effort to avoid disruption. On your wider point about the pressures there, what can we do to address them? You know, I mentioned the committee. I walk down Victoria Street all the time. I'm very aware of the parking pressures there, and you know, I will, you know, continue to have conversations with my cabinet colleagues about what we might be able to do, you know, in order to find a solution.
Lovely, thank you, Councillor.
I can't hear you, sorry, Leader.
Councillor Chandler, I will get pressing buttons right by the end of this meeting. I see you've got your hand up. Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you, Leader, and thank you, Councillor Callard. So it's a mixture of an observation and a question, and I suppose from the first point of view, I think the question that was raised, as you've said, about whether it should be sold or whether it should be leased, I think it, you know, from my perspective, and particularly with my cabinet portfolio hat on, I think it's really important that it has a community use, and I think to be leased and to be leased for part of the community, I think is really important, and I think it is also really important that we have, in our county and in our towns, a diversity of spaces for different parts of our community, so that we're reaching all parts of our community, because we don't have a one-size-fits-all where one centre can meet everybody's needs. So I think that importance of being able to facilitate and offer spaces for a variety of different community groups and associations is important. And I think the MMCA are an important integral part of our community. Because their members work in our hospital, Neville Hall in Abergavenny. They work in other parts of our health and social care system. They're key members of our business community in Abergavenny. So I think recognising their integral part of our community is really important. So that's all I wanted to say in terms of observation. I have a couple of questions. One in terms of that you might not have the figures at the top of your head, but I just wondered, just to get a sense of perspective, is how many properties do we lease out across the county, and why is this maybe seen as a special case, and particularly how many tendering exercises do we go through? But you may not be able to answer that now, so if you can't, don't worry, because I've just sprung that question on you. My other question, though, is obviously that MMCA have been part of our community for some time, and they've been sharing premises with one of the Christian churches in Abergavenny. And I just wondered whether you'd had any feedback from other faith groups about the proposal for MMCA to take out a lease on the Carnegie building, because I think their perspective will be particularly important, I think, in terms of considerations here.
Thank you, Councillor Chandler. I'm sorry, I've got a bit of a bad connection, so I missed the last part of your question. Could you repeat it for me, please?
Yeah, I was just wondering what feedback, if any, of you had from some of the other faith groups in Abergavenny, who I know that about their attitudes to MMCA leasing this building and opening a mosque.
Thanks for the question, Councillor Chandler. On the first question about the number of leases, combined, I can speak since 2022, but if you include short-term licenses in the equation, we've I think 67 is the number that we've entered into in the last 3 years. So it's a reasonably significant number, and 6 of those have been to community groups within Monmouthshire who wish to lease our assets. I'd also make the distinction a little bit between, because this is a kind of a funny crossover in that this is a community group, but they're leasing this building on commercial, on a commercial lease. So they are not, as you'll be aware, Councillor Chandler, because I know we've worked on some of these things together. In most cases, if a community group leases a building, be it Abergavenny Community Centre, be it the Bridges Centre, then a rental grant is applied, which has the effect of subsidising those groups. That is not the case with this group. No rental grant has been applied for, and so this property is offered on, in effect, a commercial lease. On the second question about representations, I've been really struck actually since the call-in that I've just had so many emails expressing support for this proposal, and it's interesting that until the decision was under question, I think many people stayed quiet on their support for this. But when it was called into question with the call-in, I have had probably dozens of emails, expressing support for this proposal, which I've been really pleased to see. And they do include people within the religious community in Abergavenny, within the Baptist Church. We know that the Catholic Church supported this organisation for a long period of time at the St Michael Centre. So I've been really pleased to see active support across our community that this proposal has generated.
Thank you, Councillor Callard. That's really reassuring to hear that.
Thank you, Councillor Chandler. I do have to echo Councillor Callard's observation of the number of emails and letters of support. I have had dozens, absolute dozens of them across the county, actually, the vast majority from residents of Abergavenny. I've had 3 emails questioning the grounds for the decision and supporting the call-in. I was very surprised by that. You can imagine as leader, I get a lot of emails, the majority of which aren't actually praising me for a decision I've made. And that's fine, that's as it should be. But I was surprised by the numbers of letters of support, and it did run into the dozens. I'm now going to bring in Councillor John. You have 2 questions that you wish to ask. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Leader, and good afternoon, everyone. Can I thank you for the contributions you've just made, and for the recognition, I think, in both in the meeting and in this morning's Abergavenny Chronicle, that residents have had some legitimate concerns about this. And I do feel that earlier engagement could have perhaps mitigated those concerns instead of the public finding out about effectively a done deal from the local papers on a 30-year lease when, of course, supporters of Tudor Street Day Centre were only given a 12-month lease. So I do feel earlier engagement with the public could perhaps have mitigated some of the unfortunate conflict that
Councillor
we've
John,
seen.
could you ask your question, please? That was not the question you submitted.
Yeah, my first question is, why do you expect taxpayers to subsidise this building, which is effectively what you're proposing, with a rent of just £500 per month, when your own budget papers concluded that a reasonable market rent would be between £20,000 and £25,000 per annum? Do you think it's fair to expect taxpayers to subsidise this building?
Thank you for the question, Councillor John. I touched on this briefly in my answer to Councillor Chandler, but the taxpayers of Monmouthshire will not be subsidising this building. We put it out for competitive tender, and the rental figure proposed by MMCA was the highest in the submissions. I suppose it's probably worth mentioning that this lease is a full repairing lease, which, in the context of an old Grade 2 listed building, is not insignificant. If you or I wanted to rent a shop in Abergavenny for commercial purposes, we may well pay a higher rent, but we wouldn't be expected to fix the roof if it broke, and that's not the case here. And this building does come with significant liabilities. So I think this is a good deal for Monmouthshire, and I look forward to I hope if Cabinet agree the decision today to welcoming MMCA to the building.
Thank you for that answer. My second question, the Monmouthshire Muslim Community Association business plan, on page 6, it refers to a noble commitment given by the Cabinet in 2023 to set up a mosque. Does that imply any predetermination by Cabinet that perhaps it was agreed 2 years ago that you were going to do this?
I don't think so. The building was declared surplus last autumn. I don't think there's been no secret that as a Cabinet, we would like to see a place for the Muslim community to worship within our county. I was pleased when I saw that MMCA had put in a bid for this property, and I was pleased when officers came to me with the scoring matrix to show that they had assessed that it was the highest scoring of the bids.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor John. And we have one question from Councillor Francis Taylor, which Councillor Howarth will be asking. Go ahead, Councillor Howarth, and welcome.
Thank you, Leader, and good afternoon, everyone. Just to be clear, Councillor Taylor couldn't make it this afternoon because of the 10-day slot that we generally have for calling. We just stretched over that, so she was booked, so she's asked me to stand in for her today. Like many others as well, we've had I've had loads of emails reference to where we are on the decision that Cabinet took, and many for our Muslim community within the Abergavenny region, but many are totally opposed to where we or you want to put the Muslim community for their mosque. It isn't suitable. I'm sure we can find a better place for them and more suitable for them, reference to that. So my question to you is, the calling highlighted some very clear shortcomings in the decision-making process and once again showed the lack of respect for pre-decision scrutiny. Can the Cabinet member confirm that whatever Cabinet's decision there will be, an opportunity for engagement with all stakeholders following the call-in? Has any further consultation or engagement taken place involving MMCA and residents in the locality of the former Abergavenny Library? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Sorry, Leader. Thank you for the question, Councillor Howarth. I think I'll take issue with your premise that that we put a mosque in this place. We conducted a tendering process, and the submission by MMCA won a transparent scoring process. This wasn't a decision where, as a cabinet, we were looking where can we place a mosque within Monmouthshire. I think you've got it a bit backwards there. To the rest of your question, you say there were some very clear shortcomings in the decision-making process for this decision. I suppose I would take issue with that, in that, as I mentioned earlier, we've entered into 67 leases and licenses within the past 3 years with this same decision-making process. And yet it's this one that you decide the process is wrong. I mean, forgive me, Councillor Howarth, but I think if you would have had an issue with this process, you might have picked it up a little bit earlier rather than wait for the 67th lease to be issued. So I think there was a bit of inconsistency from you on that. But to the more substantive part of your question about community engagement, yes, more community engagement has taken place. I believe, and they can speak for themselves, but I believe the leader and the ward member, along with MMCA and other councillors and members of the town council, went around the local area very recently to talk to residents. I mentioned it in my introduction, and received actually a very positive response. And as I said, I believe that the MMCA are going to be responsible and considerate tenants to this property.
Thank you, Councillor Callard. Yes, indeed, I and Councillor Wright did visit. I also went to visit on my own the landlord of the Growfield and the 2 residents who came to speak on their concerns with parking, both from the Elms House and the issues of privacy. I did meet with people who had very genuine concerns about car parking, and I think we recognise that. We also recognise car parking would be an issue whoever moved into that building. The overwhelming majority of people I spoke to were in support of having a mosque in the community. Some community members offered to standard witnesses in support. We've decided not to take up that offer. There were 2 people who had strong views against a mosque. And we recognise with any decision that a council makes on any matter, there'll be a range of opinions. It's the process of engagement. It was clearly set out in the business case that the MMCA would do if and when they received the lease. It would be bizarre in a commercial tender for the council to do the engagement on behalf of different bidders on the off chance that they might win the lease. So we didn't. So, Cabinet. And why I switched off, I don't know. Bear with me, people. We have 2 parts to the recommendations. It's really an either-or. The Cabinet considers the discussion held at Place Scrutiny Committee on 11th of June 2025 and makes a decision whether to accept the Cabinet decision made on the 21st of May 2025 or reconsider the decision. Cabinet, because of the nature of this decision, I will ask you one by one. Councillor Birch, do you accept the decision?
Do you accept the decision?
Councillor Sandals.
Accept the decision.
Councillor Wright.
Yes, I accept the decision.
Councillor Maybe.
Accept the decision.
Councillor Callard.
To accept the decision.
Councillor Chandler.
Yes, I'd accept the decision we made.
That is unanimous. Okay, we'll move on to item 6, please, Cabinet. Move on to this.
Do you want me to take over, Leader? This report's with me.
Indeed. Before you carry on, just to clarify, Nick, the decision is accepted. The lease will be awarded to the Monmouthshire Muslim Community Association, and I look forward to being welcomed when they open the mosque. Thank you very much. If members of the public wish to stay, you're more than welcome. We have a very entertaining agenda today. So over to you, Councillor Callard, on the strategic risk assessment.
Thank you, Leader. The Council's strategic risk and risk assessment helps to ensure that strategic risks are identified and assessed robustly. The risk controls are put in place that are appropriate and proportionate, and that risks are supported by effective mitigation to ensure, as far as possible, risk reduction and risk management. Strategic risks covered by the assessment are typically risks which could significantly jeopardise the Council's ability to achieve its objectives, statutory plans, or provide operational services as planned. The risk assessment only covers high and medium level strategic risks. Lower level or operational risks are not registered unless they are projected to escalate within the 3 years covered. The strategic risk assessment should continue to focus on medium-term risks to service delivery. Appendix 1 provides the latest strategic risk register for the Council. The assessment is a detailed document, and any significant changes or updates made to each risk can be found in the key changes column in the summary table at the start of the full register. The Council continues to operate in a dynamic environment and has controls in place to assess, manage and mitigate, as far as possible, a variety of risks. The Strategic Risk Register is a live document and is continually updated based on the latest evidence. This will include adjusting the focus, detail and risk levels of risks where necessary. Some key changes made in the last 6 months are: Risk 4, related to workforce, has been reworded due to a change in the nature of the risk. This risk now focuses more on the Council's own workforce planning challenges rather than external labour market changes. The post-mitigation risk scores for 9A, related to school attendance, have reduced from high, a score of 12, to medium, a score of 8, to reflect progress made in implementing mitigating action and positive movement in primary attendance data. Risk 11, related to climate, has been divided into 2 separate risks to better reflect differing causes and mitigation required. This also allows for separate assessment of risk levels and targets. The risk relating to increased demand on Council services due to the increased cost of living, previously risk 12, has been de-escalated from the Strategic Risk Register to Directorate Risk Registers to be managed. This reflects the mitigations put in place for the organisation to support and manage the demand. This recognises that pressures remain for families due to the increased cost of living, and this risk will be continued to be managed on the Directorate Risk Registers of those services, still seeing more families requiring additional public service support as a result of cost of living. And finally, the risk relating to the increased risk of legal challenge, previously risk 14, has been de-escalated from the Strategic Risk Register. The inherent level of risk relating to legal challenge is carried and mitigated by the legal team. As part of the current reporting round, target risk scores have been introduced. These indicate that optimal risk score the Council has assessed it could achieve following successful mitigation. This needs to be set in the context of available resource and the bearing the Council's actions can have on reducing the likelihood and or impact of the risk. In most cases, mitigating actions result in a change to the likelihood of the risk rather than the potential consequences, as our actions are generally aimed at reducing the chance of a negative event occurring rather than lessening its impact. There will be exceptions depending on the risk. Some target risk scores may remain the same as post-mitigation risk scores. This indicates that risk scores are not able to be lower further with available mitigation. Risk scores will be continuously reviewed to ensure they fairly reflect realistic ambition. The Strategic Risk Assessment was presented to Performance and Overview Scrutiny Committee on the 3rd of June to enable the committee to fulfil its role of scrutinising the risk assessment and responsibility holders to seek assurances that strategic risks have been appropriately identified and risk is being appropriately managed. An overview of the Strategic Risk Register was also presented to the Governance and Audit Committee on the 12th of June to fulfil the committee's role of assessing the effectiveness of the authority's risk management arrangements. The feedback from these committees has been considered in the continued update of the Strategic Risk Register and Implementation Policy. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Callard. Cabinet, do you have any questions or observations? Can I see anyone online? No. In that case, Councillor John, I'll bring you in. You have two questions to it. No, one question to ask. Please go on.
One question, yeah. Firstly, Leader, can I just associate myself with your comments a few moments ago and wishing the Monmouthshire Muslim Community Association well in their new home. Moving on to the risk register, can I ask why the risk of school attendance levels not returning to the levels they were at before the pandemic has been downgraded to medium, below the high risk that has been given to the global climate of Monmouthshire County Council not reaching net zero by 2030. The implications for children's life chances, particularly those who are entitled to free school meals, of significant non-attendance at school are enormous. Those two don't sit well side by side to me. Can you explain that, please?
Thank you for the question, Councillor John. I completely agree with you that you know the importance of children's attendance at school on improving their life chances. I touched on it briefly in my introduction, but I can expand a little bit. In order to respond to your question, we assess risks individually in line with the requirement of our strategic risk management policy. The risk levels are assessed based on the evidence for each risk, and we look at each risk on its own merits, and the risk level is relative to that individual risk rather than being comparative to other risks. And in that we recognise the importance of the children attending the schools and the benefits to their life chances, as I mentioned. That's why we've got school attendance in the Strategic Risk Register, because we give it that importance. We have an ambition, as you rightly highlight, to restore our school attendance to pre-COVID pandemic levels. But within this and within our mitigation, we've been working with the schools to increase attendance, and our data shows that attendance levels in our schools have been increasing, and particularly in primary schools. And that evidence is the basis of us reducing that risk from a high level to medium level. And I'd also add that we are continuing to keep this on our strategic risk register. We continue to recognise that it is a risk, and we will continue to monitor it.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Howarth.
Thank you, Leader. My question is, we know that the risk that a lack of political majority makes it harder to ensure timely and appropriate decisions making, which results in delays and uncertainty in some projects. That mitigation is offered as a number of special meetings continue to be held to ensure decisions are scrutinised in advance of Cabinet and Council. Could the Leader advise that, given that there appears to be a general lack of attention to or respect for pre-decision scrutiny, is this mitigation really any mitigation at all? And the examples are the Melville, Tudor Street, and now we've got the library in Abergavenny. It seems as though Abergavenny is being a case for exactly 1B on our risk portfolio. Thank you.
Thank you for the. Sorry, Lee, I'm happy to come in on that.
No, it is addressed to me, Councillor Callard.
Okay.
Okay. Very happy to give your voice a rest on this one. Thank you, Councillor Howard. I'm a little surprised at your intemperate language with regard to this. The risk register and the mitigations are one which are put in place to ensure that we take them, and secondly, that we review them on a regular basis, which is why this is on Cabinet. It also comes to scrutiny, and that is part of the robustness of the process. I would say that according to our constitution, according to the processes that we follow, according to the scrutiny that is followed, we do follow very strict and rigid scrutiny. It is part of the democratic process, Councillor Howard, that both Haworth, I should know, we share the same ward. It is part of the democratic process that voices across the county, as well as councillors who are concerned about decisions, have the right to raise their voice, call in, have a public petition, speak before council, and engage in debate with council, so that by the time we make a decision, we are right, or we feel that the decision has been properly scrutinised and we've come to the decision that we feel is comfortable and right at the moment we made with the evidence that we are given. And that is the processes that we've followed. I don't see a call-in as democratic deficit. I see it as a democratic plus. We can never please people all of the time, but the very fact, Councillor Haworth, that you are willing to hold our feet to the fire, a term that your leader likes to use, is a positive for the council, not a negative. And decisions which affect people's lives in all sorts of ways should never be made lightly, should never be made complacency, and should never be made without scrutiny. And I do not think, and I sit here quite clearly saying, I do not think that we disrespect the democratic process of this council. Thank you, Councillor Haworth. Question. We can move on to the recommendations. Cabinet members are asked to review the strategic risk assessment and assess whether it provides a realistic and evidenced appraisal of the strategic risk facing the authority over the next 3 years. Are we in agreement, Cabinet? Could I have a show of hands, please? We agree. That brings us on to the final item on the agenda, which is nature recovery. And you'll be glad to know, Councillor Callard, that you can sit back, put up your heels and listen to the wise words of Councillor Maybe. Please come in, Councillor Maybe.
Thank you. What an introduction. Thank you, Leader. So this is to seek Cabinet approval of 2 elements of our climate and nature approach, which together set out the Council's statutory duties, responsibilities and associated actions for delivery as part of the nature recovery pillar of the Climate and Nature Emergency Strategy. So these 2 elements are the Monmouthshire Local Nature Recovery Action Plan, referred to as NRAP, I'm sorry about the acronym, Part 1, which is the strategy part of it, and secondly, Monmouthshire's Green Infrastructure Strategy, Volumes 1 and 2. I'm sorry this is so complicated. The papers are all online for those who want to dive into the detail, and I'm just going to give you the very briefest summary now. So as part of the NRAP preparation, the Local Nature Partnership were directly consulted to allow co-production. The draft NRAP and draft Green Infrastructure Strategy were also taken to place scrutiny in May 2024 for approval of a public consultation. So the processes have been followed very closely. This consultation was undertaken in the autumn last year and actually resulted only in fairly minor amendments to the NRAP and no changes at all to the Green Infrastructure Strategy. So this is why we're now at the point where, having made those very small amendments, we are asking for formal approval of these 2 papers. Just to give you a little bit of background, and I promise it won't be a long lecture, as you will, I'm sure, be aware, climate change is having a very significant impact on habitats and species and is one of many pressures on our natural world. In 2021, the Senedd declared a nature emergency, and this was prompted by the State of Nature report in 2019, which highlighted the extinction of 17% of species across Wales. In Gwent, the 2021 Greater Gwent State of Nature report showed a 34% decline in assessed species. And more recently, in 2023, the State of Nature report indicated that Wales is now one of the most nature-depleted countries on Earth, and along with the rest of the world, is facing a biodiversity crisis, with 1 in 6 species in Wales at risk of extinction. This is really very sobering. As an administration, we take our role in nature recovery and climate change very seriously. In May last year, Monmouthshire County Council reviewed the 2019 declaration of the climate emergency to include a recognition that the climate and nature crises are interlinked. This review included the development of 4 interlinked pillars of work, of which nature recovery forms one pillar. So our climate nature strategy has 4 distinct pillars. The other 3 pillars are corporate decarbonisation, communities and climate, and rivers and ocean. So focusing into the nature recovery pillar, which is the subject we're looking at this evening, this in turn has a delivery framework composed of 3 interlinked action plans, and I'll very, very briefly describe them to you. The first is referred to as Section 6 because it's Section 6 of a particular piece of legislation, and it's the Biodiversity and Ecosystems Resilience Forward Plan from 2024 to 2028. It's the statutory planning and reporting on Monmouthshire County Council's commitments under the Environment Wales Act 2016. This puts a duty on public bodies to maintain and enhance biodiversity and promote the resilience of ecosystems. And we approved this plan in May last year. So the 2 we're asking for approval for tonight are the Local Nature Recovery Action Plan, the NRAP, which aims to support the Section 6 plan and by providing practical, achievable stakeholder and community action for nature. It encapsulates the work with the local nature partnerships, which includes lots of local organisations. And the plan has 4 parts. Part 1 is the strategy, and that's what we're setting out here. Parts 2, 3 and 4 will be developed in collaboration with the local nature partnership and will comprise habitat action plans, species action plans, and a collation of case studies of projects. So lots and lots of detail there. And then finally, the Green Infrastructure Strategy, which focuses in on promoting health and well-being through green infrastructure. So it's an approach which we try to build into everything we do, as well as specifically through landscape scale projects and partnerships. So this is the other part we're asking for approval for today. And as I say, there's much, much more detail online. We're very keen always to talk to people, not just through the Nature Partnership, but in any other way, any other format on nature and climate. And that's probably quite enough for you this evening. Thank you.
I could listen all day, Councillor Maybe. This is an important subject, but also, actually, when you see what's happening across our county and what our communities are doing in partnership with us, it is uplifting. We know the challenges ahead, and we should certainly not be complacent, but I think the fact that we have this strategy in place is extremely important, and it signals to every resident just how important we take the concerns that are often expressed to me, and I'm sure to other councillors in your wards, about what's happening to our environment and nature. Do we have any questions?
If I may, Leader.
Of course.
Not really a question so much as a comment. I'd just like to congratulate the partnership and the officers who produced the strategy and action plan in taking such a complex and important subject and turning it into something which is readable and has practical actions that everybody can take, whether they have a garden or a farm.
Well said, Councillor Birch. We don't have any questions from Councillor John or from Councillor Howarth, so I will come to the recommendation, which is that we approve the adoption of the Monmouthshire Local Nature Recovery Action Plan, Part 1, Strategy, and the Monmouthshire Green Infrastructure Strategy, Volumes 1 and 2, as part of the Nature Recovery pillar of the Climate and Nature Emergency Strategy and associated action plans. Do we approve, Cabinet? Could I have a show of hands? I think that's unanimous, Nick. With that, I draw Cabinet to a close for this afternoon. I thank everybody in the chamber or online for being part of the Cabinet session, and please go forth and enjoy what's left of the sunshine. Good afternoon, everyone.